gently bloom warm my heart, and two girls with guitars sang so pretty and joined the angels' choir. I knew of no cathedral in the heart of this land, but we all gave worship in the place where we were standing. And we stood beneath the haloed moon, watching clouds move swiftly by. The mountains in the distance, my soul open wide, and our hearts took communion under a big open sky in the church of soul. I left this place on a Tuesday morn, knowing I'd return one day. An artist said to me, it can be this way always. 650 miles north, back to my home. But the communion that we share will always live inside my soul. Because we stood beneath the haloed moon, watching clouds move swiftly by. The mountains in the distance, my soul open wide, and our hearts took communion to a big open sky in the church of soul.
Beckons us into a sacred time. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, a congregation that welcomes you no matter what you look like or who you love, and no matter how you practice spiritually, because we know we need not think alike to love alike. We extend a heartfelt and inclusive invitation to join us in meaningful worship and in service to the world. We greet all those who join us this morning, those in our sanctuary, all of our many online viewers, así como el creciente número de participantes bilingües que nos acompañan desde sus hogares. Please make note that the responses that were once found in your order of service are now on laminated cards. And while mask wearing in the sanctuary is currently optional, you are encouraged to wear your mask if you are more comfortable doing so. Now please join Dr. Rock for our first hymn.
Good morning. I invite you all to open your hymnals, the gray ones, to number 16. 'Tis the gift to be simple. Please rise in body or spirit and join as we sing together. Tis the gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to grow and to live we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till with turning we come round right. Thank you.
This is the time when we turn to greet the day and those in our community. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. Now is the time when we turn to quiet our minds, open our hearts, and lift our voices. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning, we come round right. Now is the time when we pause to acknowledge those things we find have worth in our lives. Come, let us worship together.
Those of you who were with us last week will have heard of our efforts to craft a covenant statement as part of our mission, vision, and covenant efforts. We will be reciting the proposed covenant each week until March 5th, when we will vote whether to officially adopt it. Please join me in reading the proposed covenant found on the back of your printed order of service. Love is the spirit of our congregation. Service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to encourage one another. Thus do we covenant.
Some push through the cracks in the sidewalk, tattered and torn, but colorful masterpieces. Survivors still, they grow, still reaching for a higher ground. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue Some bear fruit after fragrant blossoms fill the air. They spring to life from an ancient tree. Red apples, cherries, oranges, peaches, and figs. Sweetness to soothe the bitter world. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Some flowers for the bees and golden finches try to grow taller than the trees. Speckled orange, yellow, fancy pink lantana for the butterflies flying free. Moonflowers only bloom in the cool nighttime, only seen by few. Too delicate for the morning sun, their lives in too soon. Still, we are flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Big blue sky, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky. Flowers, million-colored petals, reaching for the sunlight, canvas of a big blue sky.
Wow. I think you may agree. I think you may agree it was well worth it to get out of bed and drive through the rain to hear Narissa bless us with this music today. Good gravy. This is the time when the young folks head out to do their other activities, and I don't see well, I shouldn't say I don't see young folks. I do see young folks. I don't see those young enough to follow Carol out, though. But nevertheless, we take every chance we can to sing. So find Singing the Young on Their Way and join us in singing As You Go on the laminated card. Please join with me in a spirit of reflection, a time that some call meditation and others name prayer. Breathe with me the breath of life. Breathe in for loving, for acceptance, and with a sense of calm. Breathe out the sorrow, the division, and the stress. Inhale as we share this interwoven, intricate web of affinity. Exhale as we feel one another's presence. breathe with me as we gather to do the holy work of kinship and support. Open your mind, open your heart. God of many names and mystery beyond all our naming, today we gather to mourn all forms of violence. Violence can be described as rough or injurious physical force, action, or treatment. In just 44 hours in California, there were 3 mass shootings and 19 lives lost. May we combat this violence with love, with compassion, and by advocating for common sense legislation. Violence can be described as a swift and intense force. There have been over 100 confirmed tornadoes so far this year, including, of course, in the Deer Park and Baytown areas this week. May we address this violence with love, compassion, and help for those who have lost loved ones and property. Violence can be described as an unjust or unwarranted exertion of force or power as against rights or laws. Sadly, we have seen at least 2 examples. The violent beating that Tyree Nichols suffered at the hands of police officers led to his death 3 days later and has led to the officers being charged with second-degree murder, among other charges. May we fight this violence with love, with compassion, and with a resolve to stand up and seek justice for those murdered by those who misuse their authority. The Texas legislature is in session and the violence has begun. Unconstitutional and discriminatory Senate Bill 147 would ban citizens from foreign countries from buying land in the state. Texas lawmakers have filed around 36 bills targeting LGBTQ people as of last week. Many of the bills seek to limit or ban gender-affirming health care for trans kids. May we fight this violence with love, with compassion, and with a resolve to stand up for those unfairly and cruelly targeted for political gain. We pray in the names of all those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten. We pray in the names of all helpers of humankind. Amen. We pause now to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. The memorial service for Betty Patterson, a member of this church for over 60 years, will be on Saturday, February 11th at 11 a.m. Our hearts go out to Rachel and Ellen Negley and the entire family during a very difficult time. We now turn to a practice inspired by African, indigenous, and pagan traditions. We say aloud or bring to mind those we wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. They are part of the great cloud of witness and memory, and we will, even if we do not know their names, hold them in our hearts. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us remember the suffering and joy amid and among our community that we do not know. We pause in awe and wonder of the beauty, diversity, and mystery that is life. In the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
Each week, our morning offering is shared with an organization that shares our Unitarian Universalist values and through which we may live out our principles in the world. In keeping with that spirit of our practice of sharing our offering, we will be doing something very different today. Last week, in honor of Reverend Dr. Leonora Montgomery's 100 years of life, love, and service to UUs, the Board of Directors passed a resolution honoring Reverend Montgomery and established the Leonora Montgomery Tribute Fund. This fund is for the purpose of giving grants to individuals who need seed monies for initiatives that reflect our UU values and principles. Today's shared offering will seed that fund and start the effort to honor Leonora's ongoing and future legacy with First Church. Those in our sanctuary will find the instructions for text giving in the order of service, and those watching the live stream will see the instructions on your screen. Our regular Sunday morning offering collection invites us to weave a tapestry of love and action. In honor of Leonora's lifelong contribution to us, we ask you to give generously. The offering will now be gratefully received.
We will build the bridges the flood waters tore down, shore up the levees on the far side of town. We will heal the sick with access for all and not just treat their symptoms when we hear their call. With these two hands we can save the world. With these two hands we can save the world. Ooh. We can take care of Mother Earth. We can handle her with care. Stop polluting her waters, polluting her air. We can heal this home with thoughtfulness and love. Let the power of light shine through our bodies and souls. we can save the world. Save the world, yeah. Ooh, save the world. Save the world, yeah. Ooh, save the world.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Please join with me in saying the dedication to the offering that you can find on the pew card. To the work of this church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
Our first reading this morning is Crossing the Swamp by Mary Oliver. Here is the endless, wet, thick cosmos, the center of everything, the nugget of dense sap, branching vines, the dark bird faintly belching bogs. Here is swamp, here is struggle, closure, pathless, seamless, peerless mud. My bones knock together at the pale joints, trying for foothold, fingerhold, mindhold over such slick crossings, deep hip holes, hummocks that sink silently into the black, slack earth soup. I feel not wet so much as painted and glittered with the fat, grassy mires, the rich and succulent marrows of earth. A poor, dry stick given one more chance by the whims of swamp water. A bough that still, after all these years, could take root, sprout, branch out, bud, make of its life a breathing palace of leaves.
The second reading is Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Here ends the second reading.
And now I invite you to open your gray hymnals to number 317, We Are Not Our Own. Please rise in body or spirit as we sing together.
The Dead Sea, which borders Jordan and Israel, gets its name because it's nearly 10 times as salty as the ocean, a harsh environment for either plants or animals. Despite this, thousands of years ago, the region surrounding the lake was famous for succulent dates. The fruits were renowned not only for their sweetness, but for their use in treating respiratory problems and depression. Indeed, 2 millennia ago, Judean dates were Israel's biggest export. Between then and the time of the Crusades, wars and drought wreaked havoc on date cultivation, and the date forests disappeared. In the early 1960s, King Herod's fortress in Masada, near the Dead Sea, was being excavated, and ancient date seeds were discovered beneath the rubble. To determine their age, the seeds were radiocarbon dated, and one seed was determined to be a little over 2,100 years old, and another slightly less than 2,000 years old. The seeds were carefully preserved, and decades later, some of the date seeds were planted as part of a project to regrow medicinal plants lost from the area. One seed that sprouted continued to grow and was nicknamed Methuselah after the oldest person in the Bible. On the first Sunday of this month, I introduced you to January's theme, Sprouts. On the last Sunday of the month, I close out our reflections on the concept and the metaphor of sprouting. Sprouts is a monthly theme included in the theme of our church year, Roots and Branches. Roots and Branches was chosen to resonate with our work on our church's vision, mission, and covenant, referring to the roots of our community that ground us and the branches that extend out like our aspirations. Last week, Reverend Colin talked about our covenant, and next week, our guest minister, the Reverend Beth Dana, will talk about the intersection of tolerance and covenant. When I think of Methuselah, the ancient date seed that sprouted centuries after its sibling seeds did, I think of a quote that at one time I had in a little frame in my condo. It is never too late to be what you might have been. This quote is attributed to one of the leading writers of the Victorian era, Mary Ann Evans, whose pen name was George Eliot. I once liked to think it is never too late to be what you might have been, but now I'm not so sure if that's true. I might have been, and would have loved to have been, a Tony Award-winning tap dancer on Broadway. But the fact that my knees have begun hurting as I climb the stairs to my office each morning, added to the fact that I've never had a tap dance lesson, leads me to believe that's not going to happen. I would instead amend this truism to say, it's not too late to be what you are now meant to be. Because you might have been something at one point in your life doesn't mean that is what you're meant to be now. Because you're now meant to be something doesn't mean that you were ready to be that a couple years ago. There are people who make a very convincing case that many of us are hindered by the concept that we have to be passionate about only one thing. Emily Wapnick begins her TED Talk by saying, raise your hand if you've ever been asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? She claims that while this question inspires kids to dream about what they could be, it does not inspire them to dream about all that they could be. She says it does the opposite because the assumption is you must choose one thing. She calls those people with many interests and creative pursuits multipotentialites. Other terms for this are polymath and Renaissance person. During the Renaissance period, it was considered the ideal to be well-versed in multiple disciplines. The great example, of course, is painter, engineer, scientist, theorist, sculptor, and architect Leonardo da Vinci. She goes on to describe some current people who have done similar things, using their passions for disparate things to their advantage. She claims that multi-potentialites have what she calls superpowers: idea synthesis, rapid learning, and adaptability. These Renaissance people bring a wealth of skills to each new endeavor. While no Leonardo, I began a new career when some of my friends were eyeing retirement. I typically tell the story of how I came to be a UU minister at Membership 101 sessions, but I realize many of you probably haven't heard it. I was very involved in the Methodist Church growing up. I was president of the youth group and sang in the choir. Becoming a minister flickered across my mind, but I dismissed it. Although I could never have articulated it, deep down I knew a gay kid in Kentucky in the early 1980s wasn't going to be a happy or successful Methodist minister. So I followed my other interests. Years later, I was drawn to Unitarian Universalism because of UU's ability to find wisdom in multiple faith traditions. It never made sense to me that in all the world throughout thousands of years, due to my being born in the right place at the right time, I was privy to the sole religion that could provide salvation. I know I'm special, but come on. I became more and more involved in my UU church, and after I met my husband Conrad, I introduced him to the church. Score Methodists -2, UU's +2. He remembers better than I the conversation when we talked about using our gifts in the world. It suddenly occurred to me that maybe all those experiences and skills I had been acquiring through my other interests might have led me to that point, to be able to seriously consider the call to ministry. With his huge support, I left the corporate world and entered seminary. Maybe it is never too late to be what you might have been. Although in second grade, I had a different career in mind. Like Emily Wapnick asked in her TED Talk, I was asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" In one of the very few specific experiences that I remember from elementary school, the teacher was working with one of the reading groups at the front of the classroom. In our class, and I imagine many others, the class had been divided into 3 groups: red birds, yellow birds, and bluebirds. These avian titles did little to obscure the fact that we had been divided according to reading ability. She was working with the yellowbirds one day, and it occurred to her, because of something that they were reading, to ask the entire class what we wanted to be when we grew up. When she called on me, I announced that I intended to be a garbage man. Now, with all due humility, I was the best reader in Mrs. Bullock's Redbird reading group, so she was taken aback that I wanted to be a garbage man. She actually called me to the front of the room, put her arm around me, and asked how I had come to make that decision. I replied that garbage men get to wear really cool yellow slickers and get to ride on the back of big trucks. Even then, I knew it was all about wardrobe and making an entrance. To this day, I don't think garbage man, or I guess today it would be refuse removal person, is a poor career choice. Heaven knows they're needed and sometimes make more than Mrs. Bullock did as a teacher. I tell this story to relate that what we imagine we will do at one point in our life isn't necessarily what we'll be doing forever, if at all. What others want or expect us to do plays a big part in what we decide to do, of course. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 567 BCE, just below the Himalayan foothills. When he was a few days old, a holy man prophesied that he would become either a great military conqueror or a great spiritual teacher. His father, the king, preferred that the prince become a military conqueror. The king kept his son within the confines of the palace, training him accordingly in archery, swordsmanship, and various sports. He was carefully shielded from knowledge of religion and human suffering. He married, had a son, and seemed to have everything. He had virtually no experience of the world outside the opulent palace, but something drew him to explore that outside world. Overcome with curiosity, he asked a charioteer to take him throughout the country. In the streets of the capital, he encountered 3 seemingly everyday sights. He encountered a sick man, an old man, and a corpse being carried to the burning grounds. He became further upset. His sheltered life had not prepared him for this. He was shocked. He became further upset when the charioteer told him that everyone is subject to sickness, old age, and death. Returning to the palace, they passed a monk, and the charioteer explained that the ascetic had renounced the world and sought release from the fear of death and suffering. Prince Siddhartha resolved to leave his former life behind and search for an answer to the problem to suffering. He left the palace, shaved his head, and donned a beggar's robe. He rode to the forest to begin his quest for enlightenment. Now, as many of you already know, Prince Siddhartha did become enlightened and became the Buddha. He taught and shared his insights all over Eastern India and became the primary figure of Buddhism. Now, despite the outcomes of these 2 stories, separated by 2,500 years, I am not advocating quitting whatever you're doing now to become a Buddhist priest or a UU minister. However, our 4th UU principle affirms a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And a search is an ongoing process, not a destination. I'm asking that you intentionally and continuously seek out deeper meaning in your spiritual life and in your efforts to change the world for the better. At the risk of torturing today's metaphor, stay ready to sprout. You may think, well, of course, I continue to learn and reconsider ideas to refine what I believe and consider true. But I don't think that's a given with everyone. Some people don't change their opinions because they've been in their families for so long. I've talked to people who have the same views and give virtually same opinions about things after decades, regardless of changes in the world, circumstances, or events. But in the words of Muhammad Ali, the man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. I mentioned earlier our working on our covenant, which we recited earlier. We are a covenantal church, united by our promises of how we will treat one another and the world. And it's a place where we join together to seek deeper meaning and reflect on our spiritual lives. Members of a creedal church, on the other hand, unite around accepting the same set of beliefs, a creed. One of the unintended consequences of creeds in a church, in my humble opinion, is that once that belief is found and agreed upon, once those questions have an answer, ongoing spiritual work can get stymied. I was looking at excerpts from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels, in order to share one at George Cawthon's memorial service yesterday. She writes about the Gnostics and their alternate take on the message of Jesus. The Gnostic understands Christ's message not as offering a set of answers, but as encouragement to engage in a process of searching, she explains. Then she quotes the gospel. Seek and inquire about the ways you should go, since there is nothing else as good as this. In another passage, she writes, the living Jesus of these texts speaks of illusion and enlightenment, not of sin and repentance like the Jesus of the New Testament. Instead of coming to save us from sin, he comes as a guide who opens access to spiritual understanding. We can take those things we've learned up to this point in our lives to continue to better seek truth and meaning. We can synthesize our skills and talents to help better our community and the world in new and unexpected ways. In the words of Mary Oliver, a bough that still, after all these years, could take root, sprout, branch out, bud, make of its life a breathing palace of leaves. Our lives may prove to be more fruitful than we could ever have imagined. Which reminds me, 3 years ago, staff of the Arava Institute were able to begin harvesting dates from the ancient date palm Hannah. She produced almost 700 dates after being pollinated by Methuselah and 2 other ancient date palms named Adam and Jonah. The date's flavor is reported to be semi-dry with honey tones. Amen.
I invite you to open your gray hymnals once again to number 311. Let it be a dance. Please rise in body or spirit and join together as we sing.
Let the dancing soul be heard. Let the music
As we extinguish the chalice, please join with me in reading the words that are printed on your laminated cards. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As you go forth this week, may you take all that you have learned and experienced in your life and persevere to seek truth and meaning. May you synthesize your knowledge, skills, and talents to help bring about beloved community here and now. May you be a bough that takes root, sprouts, branches out, and buds to make your life a breathing palace of leaves. Go forth in peace.
Thank you so much for watching our service today. We're glad you're part of our online community, where we welcome people who are diverse in faith, ethnicity, history, as well as gender identity and sexual orientation. There are many different ways you can get involved in our community. One you can do right now is by clicking like below or subscribing to our channel. If you're interested in joining our congregation, please email us at membership@firstuuhouston.org. Thanks so much for joining us.